Why were Americans so effortlessly slim just a few decades ago? Walk into any American neighborhood in the mid-1970s and you'd notice it immediately. People were leaner. Old family photos showed dads mowing lawns, moms cooking simple dinners, and kids flying down sidewalks on their bikes. It wasn't dieting or gym culture. America simply lived differently. Smaller plates, real food, constant movement, and a world untouched by supersizing quietly shaped a naturally thin generation. Today, let's step back into that simpler America and uncover the surprising truth behind it. Do you remember what America looked like in the early 1970s, before fast food ruled every corner and before screens followed us everywhere? You can probably still picture it. Kids riding their bikes down long suburban streets, moms finishing chores with the windows open, and dads mowing the lawn on Saturday mornings while the radio played in the background. Life felt slower, simpler. And if you look at old photos from that decade, one thing stands out instantly. Almost everyone was thin. But it wasn't because people were dieting, counting calories, or joining gyms. Something deeper, woven into daily routines, kept bodies lean without effort. Breakfast was straightforward: toast, eggs, or a plain bowl of cereal. No sugar-packed creations, no oversized portions. And most households had only one car, which meant walking was simply a part of life. Kids walked to school. Parents walked to the store or to a neighbor's house. If you needed something for dinner, you grabbed a bag and headed out on foot. Nobody called it exercise. It was just living. Children burned away their energy naturally. Hours outside playing tag, kickball, or riding bikes until the streetlights came on. And adults weren't sedentary either. Even office workers moved more, delivering papers between desks, climbing stairs, or getting up to change the TV channel by hand. Eating out was a treat. A trip to Pizza Hut felt exciting. Fried chicken on a Sunday night felt special. Most meals came from home kitchens, which kept portions small and ingredients simple. That was life in 1970s America, a world with fewer screens, fewer shortcuts, and more reasons to move. People didn't stay slim because they tried. They stayed slim because the rhythm of everyday living made it effortless. If you grew up in America during the 1970s, you probably remember this. Almost every meal came from someone's kitchen. Not a drive-thru, not a delivery app, not a takeout bag. It came from a stove that clicked when you turned the dial, an oven that took forever to preheat, and a fridge with far less inside than the ones we have today. Dinner didn't just appear. Someone had to make it, usually a mom, a grandmother, or whoever ran the household. And that daily ritual shaped the size of America's waistline more than any diet ever could. Meals were simple, predictable, and modest. A piece of meat. 2 sides. A salad if you were lucky. Nothing oversized, nothing dripping with cheese. Nothing extra value. A family could sit down with a single pound of ground beef and stretch it into a full dinner. Meatloaf, sloppy joes, hamburger casserole. You name it. Plates were small too. The average dinner plate was 8 or 9 inches across, not the giant platters we eat from now. What you could fit on it was all you got. And here's something else people forget. Cooking took time. Real time. Peeling potatoes, snapping green beans, rolling out dough, mixing casseroles by hand. The extra work naturally kept portion sizes in check. Because the truth is simple. Nobody wants to peel 10 potatoes. Nobody wants to chop 5 onions. When food takes effort, you make just enough. Dinner time was sacred. Families sat together at the table almost every night. You didn't grab food, wander to your room, or eat in front of a screen. You sat, you ate, you talked, and when the food was gone, that was it. No seconds unless it was Sunday. No giant refills, no grazing afterward. Eating out? That was rare. Maybe once a month, maybe less. A meal from McDonald's felt like a treat. A pizza night meant something special because eating out cost money, real money, and families simply didn't do it often. Did your family also cook most meals at home back then? Or were there days when you had to get creative with whatever was left in the pantry? There was something different about childhood in 1970s America. a kind of wild freedom that's almost impossible to imagine today. Mornings began with the slam of a screen door, a quick shout to your friends down the street, and then you were off, riding bikes, running barefoot through yards, or exploring every corner of the neighborhood. Hours slipped by without anyone checking a watch, and most kids didn't return home until the streetlights flickered on. All that nonstop movement added up to more activity in one afternoon than many of us get in an entire week now. Kids didn't need gym memberships or scheduled play dates to stay active. The world outside was the gym, and it was open all day. Climbing trees, racing bikes, jumping ditches, shooting hoops in a cracked driveway, or playing tag until everyone was out of breath. It was a constant rhythm of motion. Even walking to school added up. Many kids walked a mile or more each way, 5 days a week, rain or shine. No drop-offs, no buses circling the block. Just you, your friends, and a long stretch of sidewalk. Once school let out, the real exercise began. Kids roamed neighborhoods like miniature explorers. They played kickball in the street, built forts in empty lots, or spent hours at the local park. Entire summers disappeared into games of hide and seek, swimming at the community pool, or riding bikes until the tires went bald. No phones, no screens, no sitting still. If you stopped moving, you missed out. Chores were another hidden workout. Kids mowed lawns, pushed mowers, carried heavy bags of groceries, shoveled snow, raked leaves, hauled firewood, and ran errands for neighbors. A simple Saturday chore list could burn more calories than some adults burn in a day at the office. And nobody called it exercise, and it was just part of being a kid. Even boredom made children active. When nothing was happening, you didn't scroll through a phone. You went outside to find something to do. The neighborhood was your entertainment system, and your body was the controller. All of this movement added up fast. Today's experts estimate that the average child in the 1970s burned thousands of extra calories each week, simply by living life the way kids did back then. Without even trying, children stayed lean because their days were built around motion, adventure, and wide-open freedom. Growing up in the 1970s wasn't just fun. It was a full-time workout disguised as childhood. One of the biggest differences between 1970s America and today can be summed up in one simple idea. The food was real. It tasted different, it looked different, and your body reacted to it differently. There were no long ingredient lists, no neon-colored snacks, and no shelves packed with products designed to keep you eating long after you were full. Walk into a grocery store in 1975 and you'd notice something right away. It was smaller, much smaller. The aisles were shorter. There were fewer brands, fewer flavors, fewer temptations. And yet somehow, everything you needed was right there. Bread was just bread. A few ingredients. No stabilizers to keep it soft for weeks. The loaf went stale in a couple of days, which is why so many families bought it fresh 2 or 3 times a week. Milk came in glass bottles or simple cartons. Not flavored, not sugary, not enhanced with anything. Butter was butter. Cheese was cheese. And meat looked like it came from an actual animal, not shaped, pressed, or reformed. Even the snacks were simpler. Pretzels, peanuts, maybe a bag of plain potato chips for a special occasion. Nothing dusted with bold flavors, nothing built to be addictive. If you wanted cookies, someone usually baked them. And if you did buy a package from the store, it wouldn't disappear in one sitting. There just wasn't anything in it engineered to make you lose control. Kids didn't grow up surrounded by sugar bombs disguised as breakfast. Cereal was cornflakes, Rice Krispies, or plain Cheerios, not marshmallow-loaded, chocolate-coated mountains of sweetness. Yogurt was tangy and plain. If you wanted it sweeter, you stirred in a spoonful of jam yourself. Soft drinks were occasional treats, not everyday habits. The food industry simply didn't know yet how to manipulate the human palate. They hadn't mastered the bliss point, that perfect balance of sugar, salt, and fat that keeps you craving more and more. Without that engineering, people stopped eating when they were full, not when the bag was empty. And real food takes time to eat. It takes chewing. It takes effort. You can't inhale a baked potato the way you can inhale a bag of cheese puffs. You can't mindlessly overeat when the food isn't designed to be devoured. When Americans of the 1970s sat down at the table, the food on their plate had fewer surprises and far fewer hidden calories. It was simpler, fresher, and closer to its natural form. And without even realizing it, that alone kept waistlines smaller and stomachs satisfied. Do you remember a time when food tasted simpler and fresher before everything came in boxes and bags? I'd love to hear what you miss most. If you look at old family photos from the 1970s, you'll notice something many people forget today. Most driveways only had one car. Not two, not three, just one. And that single car was usually reserved for the parent who needed it for work. Everyone else walked, carpooled, or took the bus. It wasn't unusual, it was simply how America moved. And that alone kept millions of Americans in constant motion without ever thinking about getting exercise. Back then, if you wanted to go somewhere, you planned your day around transportation that required your own 2 feet. Walking to school, walking to the store, walking to the bus stop, walking home again. Even going to church or visiting a neighbor often meant a stroll down the street or across town. Kids walked in groups, laughing and talking the whole way. Adults walked with purpose, grocery bags in hand. Parking lots weren't oceans of asphalt like today. Many stores didn't build massive lots because demand didn't exist yet. If you had to park a block or two away, that was normal. If the car wasn't available, you walked without complaint. And compared to today's jobs, work in the 1970s was far more physical. Manufacturing plants, steel mills, auto factories, textile mills, these industries still employed millions. A factory shift meant standing, lifting, bending, pushing, and moving for hours. Even office jobs weren't sedentary. People walked paperwork between departments, fetched files from large cabinets, delivered memos, and climbed stairs because elevators were slow or crowded. Technology didn't eliminate effort, it demanded it. For women running the household, the work never stopped. Laundry meant lugging heavy baskets and hanging clothes outside. Floors were scrubbed on hands and knees. Vacuum cleaners were bulky machines you had to wrestle across every room. Yard work and gardening required actual strength. No lightweight electric tools, no automatic anything. Even simple tasks burned calories. Changing TV channels meant standing up. Opening the garage door meant lifting it. Rolling down the car window meant cranking it by hand. And without modern conveniences like microwaves, electric peelers, dishwashers, or powerful blenders, daily chores took real energy. America in the 1970s was not built for sitting. It was a world where movement was stitched into every hour of the day. People weren't intentionally active, the environment simply required it. And because their bodies stayed in motion from morning to night, weight gain had a much harder time catching up. One thing about the 1970s often gets overlooked, yet it may have mattered more than anything else: how little people actually ate at one time. Not because they were dieting, and not because they were trying to be good, but because portion sizes were simply smaller. The plates were small, the servings were modest, and big food hadn't been invented yet. You didn't leave the table stuffed, you left satisfied. And that quiet difference shaped a thinner nation without anyone realizing it. If you sat down at a dinner table in 1975, the first thing you'd notice is how tiny everything felt compared to today. Dinner plates were 8 or 9 inches across, and practically the size of a modern side plate. Glasses held a cup or two of liquid, not half a liter. Even serving bowls looked more like what we now use for cereal. Families didn't pile food high, and meals weren't framed around abundance, they were framed around enough. The fast food world followed the same rule. A McDonald's hamburger fit in the palm of your hand. Fries came in a small paper pouch. A large soda was the size of what we call a medium, or even a small. Today, ice cream scoops were single, not stacked into mountains. Milkshakes came in modest cups. No one needed to loosen their belt after lunch. At home, dinner reflected the same modesty. A typical plate held one thin slice of meat, a spoonful of vegetables, and a scoop of potatoes. Going back for seconds wasn't common. It was something that happened on weekends or after a holiday meal. Most parents served just enough for everyone, and when the serving dish was empty, that meant dinner was over. If you were still hungry, you waited until breakfast. Desserts followed the same philosophy. Maybe a sliver of pie, maybe one cookie, maybe pudding shared among the kids. A treat wasn't a daily expectation. It was something you earned by finishing your chores or saving it for Sunday night. Restaurants weren't pushing oversized portions either. A steak was 6 ounces, not 16. Pasta dishes weren't overflowing. Even salads were light and simple. Lettuce, tomato, maybe a sprinkle of cheese. Nothing drowned in dressing or loaded with toppings. And leftovers mattered. They weren't an afterthought. They were part of the weekly plan. Last night's roast chicken became tomorrow's soup. A small portion of casserole stretched into lunch. When families respected leftovers, they naturally kept portions conservative so nothing went to waste. America in the 1970s didn't measure health by how much food you avoided. It measured it by how far a meal could go. People weren't afraid of hunger between meals. They weren't surrounded by giant servings at every turn. And because more wasn't constantly placed in front of them, they rarely ate more than they needed. Portion control wasn't a fad. It wasn't a diet trick. It was simply the way America lived. And that quiet restraint helped keep an entire generation naturally lean. How about your family? Were your portions small and sensible too? Or did someone in the house always sneak back for a little extra? If there's one habit that truly separates the 1970s from today, it's how people ate between meals. Or rather, how they didn't. Snacking wasn't a lifestyle, it wasn't a routine. It wasn't something you did absent-mindedly while watching TV or scrolling through a phone. In fact, if you reached for food outside of mealtime, you'd probably hear someone say, "Don't spoil your appetite." And they meant it. Most homes didn't have pantries bursting with chips, crackers, and cookies the way we see today. People had cupboards, not snack closets. And inside those cupboards, you'd find staples: flour, sugar, canned goods, beans, rice, not boxes and bags of ready-to-eat treats. A single package of cookies might sit on the shelf for a week because everyone knew they were for special moments, not everyday grazing. Kids weren't wandering through the kitchen grabbing something every hour either. In many families, after-school snacking was limited to something small, maybe an apple, maybe a peanut butter sandwich, maybe nothing at all if dinner was coming soon. And if you did sneak into the kitchen, Mom always knew. Somehow she knew exactly how many cookies were left in that tin. Candy was a luxury, not a constant. You didn't get candy every day, you got it once a week. Saturday was candy day for many kids. A trip to the corner store with a handful of coins, choosing exactly which penny candies to buy from glass jars behind the counter. And those little treasures had to last. You didn't tear through a whole bag in one sitting. Even workplaces didn't encourage snacking. There were no vending machines on every floor, no stocked break rooms, no energy bars tucked into every desk. People ate at set times, breakfast, lunch, dinner, and that was that. And remember, shops closed early. If you wanted snacks after 5 p.m., you were out of luck. No late-night grocery runs, no 24-hour convenience stores, no delivery apps dropping food on your doorstep. Snacking wasn't restricted, it simply wasn't part of the culture. And because food wasn't constantly available, people didn't constantly eat. Appetite stayed sharp, meals stayed meaningful, waistlines stayed smaller. There was a time in America when sweetness felt rare, almost magical. A bottle of soda sitting in the fridge meant something exciting was coming. A homemade cake cooling on the counter could lift the mood of the whole house. Sugar wasn't an everyday companion the way it is now. It was measured, saved, and used with care. And because sweetness came in small, meaningful moments, it shaped the way people ate in ways we barely recognize today. In the 1970s, sugar simply cost more. Families didn't toss extra scoops into everything. They stretched what they had and treated it with a kind of quiet respect. A bag of sugar was a considered purchase, not a weekly habit. And when something is used sparingly, it naturally changes how often, more than how much, people consume it. Soda is the perfect example. Having one in the house felt like having a little celebration in waiting. Kids didn't come home and open a can just because they were thirsty. Adults didn't store cases of it in the garage. Many families saved soda for Friday nights, special weekends, or birthday parties. And the cans themselves were smaller, 8 to 12 ounces. Nothing like the oversized cups that have become normal today. Breakfast followed the same quiet restraint. Most cereals were simple: cornflakes, Rice Krispies, plain Cheerios. If you wanted sweetness, you sprinkled a little sugar on top. Carefully, yogurt wasn't candy in a cup. It was tangy, plain, and modest. Sweetening it was something you chose, not something the manufacturer did for you. Dessert wasn't a nightly expectation. In many homes, dessert only happened on weekends or holidays, and the portions were tiny. A narrow slice of cake, a dish of Jell-O, a small bowl of pudding shared among siblings. Treats were meaningful because they weren't constant. Candy lived under similar rules. Kids had allowances measured in coins, not bills. A small handful of penny candy could last the whole week. And because every piece mattered, no one ripped through a bag without thinking. More importantly, processed foods hadn't yet become sugar delivery systems. Bread, sauces, frozen meals, condiments, they weren't loaded with hidden sweetness. The food industry hadn't yet mastered the addictive blend of sugar, salt, and fat that now keeps people eating long after they're full. When sweetness is limited, the body stays balanced. When sweetness becomes constant, appetite spirals. In the 1970s, America still lived in a world where sugar had boundaries, and those boundaries helped keep waistlines naturally small. If this video brings back even one good memory, give it a little boost by hitting the like button. It really helps keep these stories alive. Thank you so much. To understand why Americans were so much slimmer in the 1970s, you have to look beyond food and exercise and step into something more subtle. The way society viewed weight itself. Not in a cruel way, not in the judgment-filled way we sometimes see online today, but in a quiet, almost universal understanding. Staying within a certain size was simply expected. Walk down any street in that era, flip through any old catalog, or watch any television show from the time, and you'll notice the same thing. Nearly everyone was thin. That wasn't because people were chasing beauty standards. It was because the average size of the country was different. And when most people look a certain way, that becomes the norm others naturally follow. Clothing stores played a big role. Sizes were smaller. Options were limited. There was no endless range of stretchy fabrics, no dedicated plus-size sections, no racks filled with oversized fits. If you gained weight, your clothes stopped fitting fast, and buying new ones wasn't cheap. So people did what people always do when something becomes inconvenient. They adjusted their habits. Television reinforced the same expectations. The anchors, the actors, the singers, the game show hosts, almost everyone on screen was slim. Not because someone forced them to be, but because that was the American look at the time. That was what audiences were used to seeing, and media shapes culture more than we realize. Even doctors were different then. They didn't hesitate to mention weight during a checkup. They weren't rude, just direct. A simple sentence like, "Let's try to keep those pounds off," was considered normal advice, not an insult. And many families had at least one relative who spoke the same way. Aunts, uncles, grandparents, they'd make passing comments that today might feel uncomfortable, but back then were just part of family conversation. Community activities also encouraged movement. Bowling leagues, church picnics, little league games, neighborhood dances. People gathered around events that involved standing, walking, cheering, and connecting. The culture itself kept everyone in motion. Most importantly, the American lifestyle didn't encourage constant eating. Snacking was rare. Portions were modest. Food wasn't a 24-hour companion. And because overeating wasn't normalized, extra weight wasn't normalized either. It wasn't about pressure, it wasn't about shame. It was simply the way the country functioned. A shared understanding that staying roughly within a healthy range was part of everyday life. The norms were different, the environment was different, and together they kept America naturally lean. If you really want to understand why Americans stayed so slim in the 1970s, You can't ignore the biggest force of all, the economy. Food didn't just taste different back then, it cost different. And the way families spent money shaped the way they ate far more than most people remember. For many households, food took up 25 to 30% of their income, double what it takes today. Every grocery trip mattered. Every item in the cart had a purpose. Nothing was bought casually and nothing was wasted. Moms planned meals carefully because one mistake meant stretching the budget for the rest of the week. You didn't overbuy, you didn't overcook, and you definitely didn't overeat because leftovers were tomorrow's lunch or dinner. Eating out was a rare event. A restaurant meal could cost what someone earned in half a day of work. Families saved those outings for birthdays, anniversaries, or the occasional Friday treat. Fast food existed, but it wasn't cheap the way it feels now. A trip to McDonald's was exciting, not routine. Nobody grabbed takeout because they didn't feel like cooking. Cooking was the default, takeout was the exception. The economic ups and downs of the decade reinforced these habits even more. Inflation, layoffs, strikes, fuel shortages. The American family learned to be cautious and resourceful. The 1973 oil crisis didn't just change gas prices, it changed the entire rhythm of life. People drove less, stayed home more, cooked more, and tightened their shopping lists. And when you cook at home, you control portions, you stretch ingredients. You make meals that fill, not meals that overwhelm. A pound of ground beef might have to feed a family of 4. A chicken had to make it through 2 meals. A bag of flour could carry a household through a week of breakfasts and dinners. Snacking was also shaped by cost. Chips, cookies, soda. These weren't impulse items, they were luxuries. Kids got candy on Saturdays because that was when they were given their allowance. Adults didn't buy cases of snack foods because it didn't fit the budget. Treats stayed treats. Even the idea of wasting food felt wrong. Parents repeated the same familiar lines. Don't take more than you can finish. We're not throwing that away. That mindset alone kept portions modest and eating patterns controlled. The truth is simple, like when food costs more, you think about it more. You buy less, you eat less, and you savor more. And without America in the 1970s wasn't perfect, but it moved at a rhythm that kept people balanced. Walking more, eating less, cooking at home, and savoring simple moments. A world without constant snacking, endless portions, or food engineered to keep you hooked. If you enjoyed this trip back to yesterday, don't forget to subscribe and share. There are many more memories waiting for us, and I'd love for you to join me on the next journey.